Hi, I'm Chuck Dorsett for Weaver Leather Supply. How about one for us costumers? We're going to make a matching set of war belts. Well, now one war belt looks good. Two nails it. Now, if you're a costumer and you haven't had a chance to jump into leathercraft, this is a great project. It's not difficult, but the outcome by no means looks like a costume piece. All right, so anything I use in this video, weaverleathersupply.com, or check below. We've got links there. Going to take you straight to the website. Also, if you want to know when our videos release, just click your notifications. You'll know exactly when these come out. So let's step over to our pattern table, talk about our patterns. This is going to look complicated. It isn't. Everything's going to fall into place, but we're going this route because we all have a different waist size. And if we do this, we take the time to measure it out, we'll have a perfect fit and perfect spacing on our conchos and spots every time. So right here, I've just got a mock-up. We've seen the shorty. We've done plenty of belt videos, but we're going to do this a little bit differently. We're going to determine our blank length. So just on a pattern, what I'm going to do, let's come in 1/2 of an inch from the end to our first hole. Let's come in 2.5 inches to our second hole. That's where we'll drop in our oblong. There's our bend back, okay? Next step, our waist size. I'm a 35 in my jeans. But let's make sure we measure our waist in our costume or our armor. We've made that mistake in a video here recently. So in my doublet, I'm 36 inches. So from this line, I'm going to come out 36 inches and I'm going to punch a hole. All right, there's our waist size. Let's come in 1 inch, punch a hole there, just in case we need to draw up on our belt. But then outside of this, let's go 5 holes at 1 inch spreads, okay? Now, for our knot, this is going to take up 8 inches from our second hole around to the bottom of the knot. So I'd like to give this ample room. I don't want too much room there or it's going to bounce on our knees and it's going to be a problem. So let's do this. Let's come out from this line 24 inches. So my belt blank is 62 inches. Well, technically 61 3/4, but I'm not going to worry about the quarter. So that's an easy way to determine our belt blank length. All right, let's reset here, talk about our design. We're going to add a certain number of conchos onto our blanks, but we need to make sure these are symmetrical, and it's super easy to do. Well, here's what I'm talking about. So on this belt, I've got the same distance from our start to our first concho, same distance between each, and again, same distance from our last concho to our stop. Well, it's easy to do. Here's an example. In fact, this is the best way to explain this. So right here on my war belt blank, on this inside hole, I'm going to measure from that hole to the inside on my size holes. That's 34 inches on me. Technically 33 3/4, but over that distance, I'm not going to worry about a quarter, okay? So 34 inches, and we're going to divide that by, we want to use 7 conchos, so let's divide that by 8. We can add 5, 6, 8, 10, make it our own. The point here is just divide by 1 more than we want to add. So we're going to divide that by 8, and that gives us 4 1/4 inches. So when we drop this in, it's going to be 4 1/4 to our first concho. It's going to be the same distance between each, and then right here, between our last concho and our stop, same distance. It makes everything very easy, whether we're simply adding conchos to a war belt or spots or decorations or stamp. If we've got a recurring design, that's the easiest way to make that happen, okay? So we've got our conchos laid in. Let's start filling in with some spots. A little more explanation, and I promise we're going to start working on our war belts. But this is my favorite part of a project. Let's lay out our elements and just see what looks good. So for our war belt, we're just going to go with 3 spots on a center line. But I like the rectangle. I almost want to go with the diamond. To me, that looks very period. So take that one and make it your own. We'll simply mimic that same design over to our smaller belt. Now, when we've got a recurring design, we don't have to make a full-length pattern. We can simply make a shorter pattern. What I'll do is I'll line up. That's our concho. That's our first rivet. Let's line that up, mark, scoot, and mark. Makes everything very consistent. So for ours, we're going to go on a center line. All we're going to do here, between our 2 conchos, I'm going to find our center mark, mark that. Then we're going to come out 1 inch on either side. We'll use a 5/16 inch spot and then a 1/4 inch spot. This is going to look good. Okay, finally, let's step over to our main table, start cutting some leather. The only downside to war belts and long belts is simply the length. These are too long to even come out of, say, something like a double shoulder. We've got to step up to a side. Now at Weaver, we've got some beautiful belt blanks and strapping, but we can't be assured they're going to be long enough for our war belts. I'm a 36-inch waist and still need a 62-inch blank. Here's the good news. When we come out of a side, this is almost 8 feet long. At its longest point, we can accommodate any waist size for a war belt or a long belt. So let's go with our holster leather. I love this. It's a pre-dyed veg tan. We've got this in a couple of colors, but because it's a veg tan, we can stamp, tool, wet form, antique, top coat. It's a great leather, but also notice the flesh side, very smooth, very clean. That's a hallmark of a quality tannage. Let's reset here, bust out some strapping. Getting a standard belt in a camera shot is tough. Getting a long belt, simply not going to happen. But all we're going to do here is strap out a 1.5 inch blank and a 1 inch blank. Now, to be as efficient as we can, and what's used most common in production shops is called blocking our leather. So I would come down 62 inches, the length of my blank, then I'll cut a 2.5 inch deep cut right there, and I'll strap just to that point. That leaves the balance of the leather intact. We're not going to worry about that here because I can always use pieces and parts of 1 inch and 1.5 inch strapping. So on our wooden strap cutter, I'm going to set this at 1.5 inch, and let's just give that a little extra tight there. I'm going to drop that, going to butt that leather right up against the handle, and notice how easy it is. And we've got our 2 straps. Let's reset here. We're going to trim to length and mark. If we didn't go to the trouble to make a prototype, it's no issue. For a lot of us, we're just going to make one set for ourselves. So we're going to measure right onto the leather. So let's start right here, down on this end, just where we've come in from the edge. I'd like to trim that off. Good, we've got that. Okay, let's cut it 62 inches. Our typical straight edge is only about 48 inches long. This one's actually 60. We can find these at just about any hardware store. I think it's called a framing square. So let's come out to 62, trim that. Good. I can always use extra strapping in my shop, absolutely. So this is one place where it's easy to make a mistake because we've got holes that we are going to punch and holes that we're going to mark drop in a spot. If by chance we punch a hole here, spot's not going to sit there. So we need to be careful. Where I'm going with this is let's use a Sharpie to mark our punch holes. Then we'll use an awl to mark for our spots. So down on this end, let's come in 1/2 inch from the end. With our square, let's do our best to center 2 marks. And now let's come down 2.5 inches. So technically, that's down to our 3 inch mark. Good, we've got that. Now let's center that. And now let's come down to 36 inches. Let's back in 1 inch. Good, let's go out 5 more holes. And that's a little bit out of camera shot, but we know what we're doing there. So let's come back to this end and with our awl. So what I want to do, our first concho mark, I'm going to lay that right on top of our black mark for our hole. Now, let's mark in our spots. But then let's come back with our Sharpie, marking our holes. And now we just scoot. And when we get down to our end, look at that, perfect. So again, let's mark for our last concho and our spots. And I'm going to do the same thing to our 1 inch strap. And that came out perfectly. In fact, Right there would be our last concho hole. Lines up perfectly with our first size hole. Now, we've got a little bit more to do here. Let's step down to our tongue. So let's do exactly the same thing. Let's start. I'm going to take the concho mark. I'm going to put that right over our last size hole. And let's drop in 1, 2, 3, and 4 conchos on the tongue. But how about one more thing? Let's end that off. Right here, we've got a 1-inch spread. So let's take that mark, put it right on the concho mark, and then let's mark for a spot. We'll put an English punch right there. That's going to look good. So let's back up, drop in our marks for our spots. And we are set to go. Okay, let's reset here. Punch our size holes and our rivet holes. We're going to punch 3 different sizes of holes here. We don't have to, but we're going to fine tune our hole size. So right here, for our rivet holes, I would like a smaller hole. I want that a little bit snug on the post of the rivet. To me, that's going to give us our best, most durable bite. So on our revolving punch, and I love this, this is our compound revolving punch. Makes everything very easy. If we're new to leathercraft, we're not going to wear out our forearm muscles. So on this, let's come up from the smallest tube. Let's come up to about the 3rd up, and let's punch these 4 holes. And our last hole, easy enough. All right, let's come down to our size holes. Now down here, we've got to have a hole large enough for our buckle, tine, or prong. So let's go up to maybe the 2nd or the largest hole, and let's punch the 7 holes here that we've marked with our Sharpie. Good, we've got our size holes in. Now for our concho holes, we could go with the largest tube, but that's going to be just a little bit small. So let's step over to our punch table, drop in our English punch, our oblong, and our concho holes. Let's start with our oblong punches. Now I like to have these come across my table. To me, it's a little easier to line these up, but as soon as we punch them, they're going to slide right off the table. So we'll do our best to get these straight right here. Now with our oblong punches, the rule of thumb in leathercraft, 1.5 inch strap, 1.5 inch oblong, 1 inch, 1 inch. So let's do our best to line up our oblong between our 2 holes and center that. There we go, that looks good. Now over to our 1 inch. And there we are. Well, you know what? I could have done a better job on that, but in all honesty, with these, if they're not perfect, when we bend that around, we're not going to see that. Should have taken my time on that. Okay, so on our English punch, and again, I like to punch these to where the punch is towards me, but when we punch it, just like our oblong, it's going to slip right off the table. So let's turn this around, center that as best we can, and I want a little bit of daylight on either side of the strap. Good. Same with our 1 inch. There we go. That looks good. Now, for the round hole punch for our conchos, what we'll need is a 3/16 inch punch. Now, we can punch with the largest tube on our revolving punch. It's going to be a little bit tight. So what I would say, with our awl or even a nail sink, let's push that through the hole, open that up a little bit, but not just from the front only. Let's do that from the back as well, and that should fit. But we're going to go with a 3/16 inch drive punch. So let's make sure we hit our concho holes. And we've got those punched. So now let's go set our spots. We're not going to add a top coat to this. I want these to look as authentic as possible. We're going to set our spots by hand, and it looks like that's going to be incredibly tedious. Actually, it isn't. But if we want speed and accuracy, the Little Wonder. That is the perfect way to go, and that, I think, sets every fastener we carry. But if we don't have one yet, it's a great tool. But if we don't have one, it's quick and easy to set spots. Now, I love the spots. They're inexpensive, they look good, and they're easy to add. But for us leather crafters, our first thought is, I'm going to work these into a design on a project. Well, let's think about the other half of that. Let's go in our closet. Do you have an old hat, hat bands, belts, pouch, purse, things that we could bring out, add a few spots, and breathe new life into them? Again, I love the spots. So to set these by hand, there's 5 easy steps. So first off, we're going to need a little pallet made out of cardboard because we're going to push our art knife through the leather and into this pallet. That'll keep us from dinging the tip of our blade. So let's start right here with our wider belt. Now on these, we're going to go with our 5/16 inch flower spot. This is the antique copper. It's going to look good with our conchos. So let's do this. First step, I'm going to take this. Sometimes it helps to bend the prongs in just a little bit so they're more parallel. Not always necessary. But let's straddle our first mark and press that in. Now, I don't know if the camera can see that, but I've got my marks on either side of our mark for our spot. So now, let's take our art knife. When we buy this, it's got a much smaller, much wider blade. This is a replacement blade. Yeah, there we go. So you can see that it's a longer blade, but also it's going to give us more depth when we push this through. So let's take this right on my mark, and I'm going to push that through. Now, let's don't go too hard because I don't want more slit than spot. But let's push that through. Now, let's flip that around because we're trying to mimic the shape of the tines on the spot. So let's do both sides. Make sure we get that good and through. Then let's take our spot, press that through. Now, flush. Very nice. That's what we're looking for. But if it isn't, we didn't get our holes large enough, we can put this on our pallet and use our mallet to press it through. In fact, we can do that. There we go. That's going to sink that nicely. Okay. The next step, let's flip this over. We've got our prongs or our tines there. Let's take the end of our art knife. Now, let's be careful. We got a sharp blade there, but let's bend those both inward. Okay. Last step, let's put this on our quartz, and I'm going to tap that. Not hard enough to ding it, but to set those tines. And that's all we need. And in fact, I can run my finger over that. I can somewhat feel that, but that's not going to snag on fabric, clothing, or us. So let's do this. To make this fast, now I'm getting my spots mixed up here. What I'll do is I'll work my way all the way down marking, then I'll come back with my knife and then add. It just makes it a little bit faster. For our smaller belt, our 1 inch, we're going to go with a 1/4 inch in the antique copper. Looks good. That's going to be a nice proportional change from the larger to the thinner belt, but it's the same set of steps. And our spots look good, very nice. Now that took a little bit of time, but compared to the time that we are going to use, wear, and love these, that's nothing at all. All right, let's drop in a concho and a buckle, and we're done here. I'm having a bit of a tough time with one point. Any project that leaves my shop, I'm going to add a groove line, I'm going to bevel and slick my edges, and add a top coat. Well, for this project, we don't want these to look showroom fresh. We want these to look authentic. We're going to leave them right where they are. Now, with our conchos, this is called a square berry concho. This is the antique copper. Now, for a 1.5 inch belt, let's go with a 1.25 inch concho. For our 1 inch belt, let's go with a 3/4 inch. Now, these little screws, they're bad about working themselves out. So let's just go with a little dab of the white glue. And this is a great glue, oddly strong for a white glue. But let's just drop a little in the throat there. Drop that in our hole, square that, flip it over, and let's add a screw. Now, before we tighten that down too much, let's flip that back over. Make sure it's square it is. Now let's tighten that down. And we're going to use a white glue. I don't want to go with something stronger, simply because if I ever need to replace our conchos, if that's welded in there, we'll never get it back out. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing to the balance. And our last concho, well, those certainly look good. Now, it's a little bit tedious putting all these spots and conchos in, but here's the point. We're going to get a compliment on these pretty quickly. The minute we do, the time we spend on this is going to go from tedious to a badge of honor. That's exactly right. Let's drop in a buckle, and we are done here. Not only do these look good, but they feel good. They've got some good weight to them. These are not cheap costume pieces with fake leather and plastic hardware. Now, I mentioned finding sizes in matching hardware can be tough, but also getting our finish to line up with all of our hardware. Spots, conchos, buckles, and rivets. At Weaver, we've got it. We've got some beautiful finishes on our hardware. So on our buckles, we're going to go with a simple heel bar buckle, 1.5 inch and a 1 inch. And in our rivets, these are our double caps, antique copper. This is the medium, or the 5/16. And there we are. Those look good. Let's step over to our main table, tie our knot. Now, to tie our knot, we do not have a keeper on these. So what we'll do, let's come around. Let's come through our buckle. I'm going to go up to about the second hole, roughly where we should land. So now let's take our tongue, let's come under the strap, and then back through. Now let's work that down. As we wear this, that's going to loosen up, and we're going to be able to tighten that up just a little bit more. Well, there we are. That looks good. So I'm going to put on my doublet. Let's see how these look. Like I said, 1 war belt looks good. 2 brings the whole thing together. To me, that's a very period look. Now we're going to wear this with a thinner belt up. That's going to be our pouch and our dagger. The lower belt, that's for our sword. So we can take our sword off and we retain the essentials. I hope your war belts are beautiful, and I hope they're a nice touch to your costume. Good luck with your projects.